He thought I was just the woman who color-coded risk reports, the one who reminded him of debt covenants and boring regulator acronyms he could wave away with a joke. I warned him once, in writing, with numbers he didn't bother to read. 19 days later, every bank line froze, the audit portal lit up like a crime scene, and the only name the system would accept on the rescue plan was mine. My name is Autumn Ward. I'm 38 years old, and my official title is Director of Risk Architecture at Helios Meridian Capital. It's a mid-size investment firm in Chicago, the kind of place that's big enough to make headlines, but small enough that one bad quarter can make everyone nervous. My title is just corporate grammar. My real job, the one I've been quietly obsessive about for 5 years, isn't writing reports. It's making sure no one can blow up this company by being stupid, or greedy, or, most dangerously, a charismatic man in a hurry. What I've built here isn't something you can see on a balance sheet. It's an invisible scaffolding. It's the network of automated covenant trackers that monitor our debt agreements in real time, programmed to scream if a portfolio manager gets too creative with leverage. It's the liquidity early warning triggers that watch our cash positions not by the day, but by the minute. It's the hard-coded approval chains I designed myself. Chains that ensure any time this firm wants to touch bank credit or investor cash. It requires 3 digital signatures, not just the one an ambitious executive can bully out of a junior controller. You can learn everything you need to know about this office by looking at our desks. My colleagues decorate their spaces with pictures of their families, smiling children in soccer uniforms, blurry photos from a vacation in Cabo. They have marathon medals and little plants. My desk is decorated with 3-ring binders, organized by regulatory body. I have flowcharts laminated and taped to the wall, detailing the precise escalation path for a trade settlement failure. I have color-flagged incident logs in a neat stack. I sometimes call myself the fire code in a building full of people playing with candles. I'm half joking when I say it, only half. About 18 months ago, we had a mini crisis. It was just a market wobble. A sudden spike in the overnight rates that spooked the credit markets. My system, the one I'd been told was a little over-engineered, caught a massive liquidity mismatch before the treasurer had even finished his morning coffee. It flagged that our short-term commercial paper obligations were suddenly maturing 10 days faster than our expected settlements from a European fund. It was a 9-figure gap that would have triggered a default event. I escalated it. The then CFO, Frank, a decent guy who was just a little too relaxed, fixed it and thanked me by the elevator. Good catch, Autumn. That was it. That was... In the board minutes, it was noted as a minor operational hiccup, resolved. The board barely registered my name. That day solidified my philosophy. You don't build controls for the people who are careful. The analysts who double-check their spreadsheets and worry about rounding errors aren't the problem. You build controls for the ones who think rules are optional when the bonus pool is on the line. You build them for the people who believe they are the exception, the ones who see a hard stop as a personal challenge. And then they hired Adrian Calloway. He was in his mid-40s, handsome in that expensive ex-Wall Street way, with a voice that sounded like it was permanently reassuring someone. He was the numbers magician hired to make Helios look leaner, more agile, just before a major refinancing deal that would set the course for the next decade. He was here to make the house show well. I saw his style in the very first leadership meeting. I had 4 slides dedicated to risk stress tests on our current liquidity buffers. He brushed past them. Yes, scary numbers. We get it, he said, flashing a smile that made half the room chuckle. He lingered, instead, on his own slides about earnings optics. He used that phrase 4 times. He kept saying, "We'll tidy the plumbing later. I just need the house to show well right now." He said it like it was a clever inside joke. I didn't smile back. The plumbing is where the bodies get hidden. The first real moment of foreshadowing came 2 weeks later. We were in a meeting about reclassifying a significant block of short-term liabilities. He wanted to move them into a special purpose vehicle, a classic accounting trick to make our liquidity ratios look healthier than they were. It was technically legal, but operationally, it was like juggling open bottles of nitroglycerin. It exposed us to a catastrophic repricing risk if the market so much as sneezed. I said as much, calmly, pointing to the specific covenants it would put under stress. He dismissed me in front of the room. Autumn, we have to stop letting fear design our systems. After the meeting, I went back to my desk. I didn't argue. I documented. I ran the exact scenario he was proposing through my models. The result was a firestorm. I drafted a crisp, one-page email with the subject, liquidity warning, please read before we move any further. I attached the analysis, the one that showed how his plan would evaporate our buffers in less than 3 weeks if the market moved just 50 basis points. I showed him exactly how it would happen. His reply came back in 2 minutes. It was a thumbs-up emoji, nothing else. I learned a long time ago that when someone ignores your warning, you don't argue, you document, and you build the exit in a place they'll never think to look. That thumbs-up emoji was a mistake, but it wasn't his first. The system he was walking into was built to withstand people exactly like him, people who answer a fire alarm with an emoji. To understand the trap he was walking into, you have to go back 2 years, flashback to Scottsdale, an executive offsite at a 5-star resort where the saguaro cacti have better lighting than most operating theaters. The leadership team was half drunk on desert sunsets and endless PowerPoint decks. The air smelled like expensive turf and chlorine. I was invited for exactly 1 hour, the 90-minute slot mercifully shortened by the CEO. My purpose was to present the boring risk stuff before everyone could get to their afternoon tea time. I was the final item before liberation. The room was warm. Frank, the previous CFO, was already tapping his pen, his golf shirt visible under his open blazer. The board chair was squinting at his phone, probably checking his flight. And finally, I said, my voice flat and monotone by design, we have the semi-annual governance policy updates. These are mostly routine housekeeping based on last quarter's audit findings. They're in the stack in front of you. We just need a final signature on the master document. The stack was 30 pages thick. It was 99% useless. Procedural nonsense, buried on page 22. Tucked between Treasury reporting frequency adjustments and revised mileage reimbursement caps, was the one sentence that mattered. It had a title designed to be skipped: Contingency Liquidity Governance Protocol. Section 9F. I wrote every word of it myself. It was my masterpiece of boring, weaponized legalese. Section 9F stated, in the driest possible terms, that in the event of a material change in risk leadership specifically, the removal of the designated head of risk architecture without a board-approved transition package and a formal covenant sign-off that a failsafe would engage. This failsafe was simple. All Tier 1 liquidity actions would auto-lock. Every major wire, every credit line draw, every collateral movement, every single action required to keep the firm's lights on would immediately be frozen. To unlock them would require a new, mandatory dual-signer chain, the Chief Financial Officer and the Fallback Risk Guardian. Here was the beautiful part. The Fallback Risk Guardian was defined as a role, not an employee ID number. It wasn't tied to a payroll account or a benefits package. It was an architectural concept, a load-bearing pillar in the system, and the initial holder of that role, hard-coded directly into the protocol's logic, was listed simply as A. Ward. The reassignment clause was even better. To assign a new Fallback Risk Guardian, the protocol required a unanimous vote of the board of directors and the current guardian's notarized, written release. I had crafted the language to be an anesthetic. It was dense with terms like contingent signatory authority, governance anchor, and protocol integrity. It was a paragraph so deliberately unreadable that no executive, especially one dreaming of a par 4, would ever give it a second glance. It was a firewall disguised as a footnote. I watched as the board chair picked up the master document. He was complaining to Frank about the Wi-Fi in the conference center. Frank laughed and said the catering was better last year. Neither of them looked past the signature page. Frank scrawled his name. The board chair added his. A junior staffer collected the document to be scanned. I stood there, holding my laser pointer. Governance is where executives confess what they're afraid of. The parts they don't read. That's where you put the protections for when they forget what they were afraid of. That night, back in my hotel room, I didn't order room service. I logged into the system. I checked the logs. The newly signed, scanned, and digitally time-stamped policy document was now live in the system. I watched as the governance engine ingested the PDF, parsed the text, and registered Section 9F. It was logged. It was time-stamped. I then personally archived a copy in 2 other separate, air-gapped systems, including an off-site backup vault that wasn't labeled with my name anywhere. It just sat in a folder marked Structural Integrity Audits. My work wasn't done. For the next hour, I ran a quiet test. I opened a sandboxed environment, a perfect digital copy of the firm that wasn't connected to the real-world banking system. In this sandbox, I created a test scenario. I flagged my own role, A, Ward, as terminated without approved transition. I hit enter. The system didn't crash. It performed perfectly. The entire liquidity dashboard slammed into safe mode. Every single payment rail turned from green to amber. A digital pop-up appeared on the test CFO's screen. Tier 1 liquidity action blocked. Joint authorization required CFO plus fallback risk guardian. The logs confirmed it. The system was locked, and the only key was held by a guardian who, in this scenario, no longer officially worked there. I smiled. Just a small, tight curve of the lips in the glow of the laptop screen. I filed the sandbox test log away, closed my computer, and went to sleep, hoping I would never, ever need it. 2 years passed. My protocol sat dormant, an invisible tripwire buried in the foundation of the firm. And now, back in the present, Adrian Calloway didn't just arrive. He descended. He brought with him an entourage of consultants from a high-gloss firm with a 3-letter name and 6-figure invoices. They walked the floor like they were auditors, clipboards replaced with iPads, speaking a new gospel. The gospel was capital light, regulation smart, optics heavy. It was a meaningless, expensive string of buzzwords that translated to one simple thing: make us look rich, fast, and don't let the rules get in the way. His first major act was to announce the Liquidity Simplification Initiative. This, I learned very quickly, was the polite corporate term for dismantling my life's work. In his kickoff presentation, delivered in the main conference room with free pastries and branded notebooks, he insisted our current controls were over-engineered. He said they were bottlenecked by one person in risk. He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. He looked right at me when he said it. A brief, dismissive glance. In the space of one 30-minute presentation, I was no longer the fire code. I was the bottleneck. I was the friction slowing down his magic show. The real tension came to a head in the leadership meeting a week later. Adrian was at the front of the room, all charisma and expensive tailoring, clicking through a deck that was high on graphics and low on data. He was selling his plan for the upcoming refinancing. To achieve the optics we need for the lenders, he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. We need to create flexibility. I am proposing we temporarily bypass certain automated stops on our short-term borrowing facilities. He wasn't proposing, he was telling. He wanted to unhook the alarms so he could window dress the balance sheet, making our cash position look artificially robust just before the lender reviews. I let the silence sit for a beat after he finished. Then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the post-pastry drowsiness. Adrian, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. We cannot do that. He turned, his smile fixed. Autumn, please, let's be solutions-oriented. I am, I said. The solution is not to do this. Those auto stops are not suggestions. They are hard-coded triggers tied directly to our debt covenants. The system is designed to halt those specific actions because they are precursors to a technical breach. If the market moves even modestly, even 50 basis points against us while those stops are bypassed, we risk tripping the covenants, and the system won't just send an alert. It is legally required to automatically report the breach to the trustees. The air in the room went cold. I had just, very politely, told the new magician that his favorite trick was a violation of federal law. Adrian's smile tightened. It was the smile of a predator. "Autumn," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We have to stop letting fear design our systems." A few people laughed. They were nervous, uncomfortable chuckles, the sycophants, the ones who wanted to be on his good side. I did a quick inventory of the faces around the table, the ones who mattered. Mark, the treasurer, was suddenly fascinated by a spot on his legal pad. Cynthia, the controller, was staring into her empty coffee cup as if it held the secrets to the universe, and our general counsel, the head of legal, deliberately avoided my gaze. They knew I was right, and they knew it didn't matter. They were afraid of him, not of the risk. I went back to my desk. I didn't argue. I documented. I spent the next 3 hours running the numbers on his exact proposal. I didn't use hypotheticals. I used the market data from that morning, with the rate volatility everyone else was pretending was noise. The results were worse than I had even stated in the meeting. I wrote a clean, cold, one-page memo. I titled it, Stress Scenario 50. Basis point rate shock plus liquidity repricing. 19-day horizon. It was a detailed, brutal piece of analysis. It was not my opinion. It was math. It showed, day by day, how his window dressing would combine with a minor, completely plausible rate shock to create a catastrophic margin call. It showed our liquidity buffers evaporating completely, not in a month, not in a quarter, but in exactly 19 days. It was a mathematical proof of the iceberg I was screaming about. I sent it directly to him via email. No one else was copied. His reply came late that night, just after 10 o'clock. It wasn't a thumbs-up emoji this time. It was worse. Appreciate the detail. This is very thorough. Don't circulate this widely. We don't want people panicking over hypotheticals. Hypotheticals. He had dismissed a forecast rooted in hard, undeniable data as a ghost story. I looked at the email for a long time. Then I forwarded his reply, along with my original memo, to a secure, encrypted personal archive. I opened the physical notebook I keep locked in my bottom desk drawer. On a fresh page, I wrote down that day's date in black ink. That date, the day he received and ignored the 19-day warning, would become day 0. The atmosphere in the office changed after that. The whispers started. Adrian's consultants were everywhere, sitting behind analysts, observing workflows. The word redundancy was suddenly being used in every meeting. I heard that the risk department was going to be folded under finance to cut redundancy and create synergies. I was being isolated. People who used to nod to me in the kitchen suddenly found their shoes very interesting. At lunch one day, I overheard one of the junior traders, a kid barely out of college, joking with his manager. I hear Autumn's team overbuilds everything like she's expecting an apocalypse. The manager laughed. Yeah, well, the sun's shining. Man, no need for an arc. They thought I was a relic. They thought my systems were just suggestions. They thought the plumbing could be tidied up later. That Friday, I stayed late. The office was dark, just the hum of the servers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew's vacuum. I logged into the system, not the user-facing dashboard everyone else saw, but the core architecture panel. I had to know if Adrian's new tech team, his simplification experts, had found my little protocol from Scottsdale. I ran the sandbox test again, the one I hadn't touched in 2 years. I navigated to the governance module. I could see their footprints. They had installed new, flashy front ends. They had optimized the reporting dashboards to make everything look prettier, but they hadn't touched the foundation. They hadn't dug deep enough to find the load-bearing walls. I ran the simulation. I typed in the command. A. Ward. Role status terminated without approved transition. I hit enter. On my screen, the simulation confirmed it. The liquidity rails slammed shut. The entire dashboard turned red. The error message appeared. Stark and beautiful. Joint authorization required CFO plus fallback risk guardian. Section 9F was still active. The rule still held. I didn't tell anyone. I closed the program, logged out, and packed my bag. I just made sure the fuse was still connected. It came on a Tuesday morning, 11:02. A sudden calendar invite. appearing with the electronic snap of a mousetrap. The subject line was a masterpiece of sterile corporate malice role streamlining discussion, mandatory. The duration was 30 minutes. The sender was Monica Hale, the Director of Human Resources. No agenda, no context. I felt that familiar. Cold drop in my stomach. The acidic plunge of gravity. It was not surprise. It was the opposite. It was the feeling of a calculation finally resolving to its expected ugly conclusion. I closed my email. I stood up. I did not rush. I buttoned the front of my blazer, picked up my leather-bound notebook, and walked out of my office. I headed toward the glass conference rooms on the executive floor, the ones reserved for conversations that were not supposed to be overheard. The walk was a new kind of quiet. I passed the finance pod, cardboard boxes, 2 of them, stacked neatly by the desks of 2 junior analysts, the ones who were good at their jobs, the ones who asked smart questions about covenant math. Their nameplates were already gone. Just 2 empty chairs, 2 dark monitors, 2 coiled-up desk phones. The office smelled of packing tape, industrial cleaning solution, and cold, stale coffee, the smell of restructuring. I pushed open the heavy glass door to the Chicago conference room. They were already there. Adrian, looking relaxed, checking his expensive watch. Monica Hale from HR, with a practiced, neutral expression that was supposed to convey sympathy but only conveyed complicity. And on the polished table, centered perfectly between them, a single, thick manila folder, my folder. I sat down in the chair opposite them. The leather was cold. Adrian smiled. It was his relaxed, rehearsed, "We are all adults here" smile. "Autumn, thanks for coming on short notice," Monica Hale chimed in, her voice unnaturally soft. "We just wanted to have a brief chat about the new direction." Adrian leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. His cufflinks were gold. His voice was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. "As you know, we're evolving our structure. We're moving toward a more agile, responsive framework, and in that process, we've had to look at all our roles. Your role, while incredibly valuable in the past, just doesn't align with where we're headed. Valuable in the past." The words hung in the air, vibrating. He went on, the buzzwords flowing like sewage. He framed me as a risk. Me. He called it tribal knowledge risk. He said, "Having one person hold this much structural understanding is, frankly, dangerous to the firm. We need processes, not people, holding the keys." It was a masterful piece of spin. He was firing me because I understood the plumbing too well, and he was calling that the problem. He was telling me the fire code was the real fire. In the very next breath, he called my controls the scaffolding I had built to save the firm from men exactly like him, friction. He called them legacy complexity. He was firing me for being a bottleneck and also for knowing too much. It was impressive, the ability to hold 2 contradictory, self-serving lies at once. Monica Hale slid the folder across the table. It made a whispering sound. "We've put together a very generous package. Autumn, we, all of us, deeply appreciate your contributions over the last 5 years." I did not open it. I knew what was inside. Money, lots of it. Enough to make me feel like I was being rewarded, not executed. Enough to buy a very nice car or a long vacation. And wrapped around that money, I knew there would be an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. I was calm. My heart rate was steady. I was not Autumn Ward, the terrified employee. I was Autumn Ward, the architect, observing a structural failure in progress. Internally, I was cataloging every phrase. Evolving structure, does not align. Tribal knowledge risk, legacy complexity. I finally opened the folder. I skipped past the numbers. I went straight to the NDA, the release of claims. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, and there it was. Paragraph 6, subsection B. I would be forbidden from discussing my employment, the firm, its clients, and this was the new part. I was to have no interference with ongoing or future liquidity initiatives. Future initiatives. He was not just firing me, he was trying to gag me. He was making sure I could not warn anyone, even after I was gone. He was trying to buy my silence on the very thing I had built my career to prevent. I looked up from the paper. "I have one question," I said. My voice was even. Adrian looked relieved, probably expecting a negotiation about my benefits or vesting schedule. "Of course. Has the board been briefed on the changes to covenant oversight? Specifically, the changes you plan to make once my role is streamlined?" The smile vanished. The mask of the casual, friendly executive was gone, replaced by the cold impatience of a man who had been interrupted. He waved his hand, a physical dismissal of the entire concept. "Autumn, the board doesn't need the plumbing details. They pay us to manage the plumbing." His voice was sharper now. "They need clean quarterly numbers. They need a successful refinancing. We've got this. This is above your pay grade. Or, well, your former pay grade." I nodded slowly. "I see." I closed the folder. I pushed it back across the table. Unsigned. Adrian frowned. "Autumn, I'd advise you to have your lawyer look at that. It's a very generous offer. It's only good for 24 hours. "It's very generous," I agreed, "but I won't be signing it today." Instead, I reached into the notebook I had brought with me. I pulled out a single, folded document. It was 1 page. I slid it across the table. Adrian stared at it. He unfolded it. Monica Hale leaned in to read it. It was a formal notification. It was dry, boring, and absolutely lethal. It stated that, per the firm's approved governance policies, I was invoking Section 9F, the transition required flag, due to an involuntary removal from my role. At the bottom was a CC line, already populated. It was addressed to the board governance internal mailbox and the external audit liaison. Adrian's face, for the first time since I had met him, was blank. The charisma had evaporated. He looked confused. "What is Section 9F? He glanced at Monica. She looked baffled. "Is this really necessary?" Adrian asked, his voice tight. "In our policy, yes," I said. I stood up, gathering my notebook. "In your risk deck, the one with all the pretty slides? I know it wasn't there." I left the room. I did not wait for a reply. I did not slam the door. I walked out. My badge still active, just as they said it would be until 5 p.m. I walked straight to my workstation. The floor was still quiet, but now it felt different. It felt like a countdown. I sat down. My hands were steady on the keyboard. I was not an employee anymore. I was a system administrator. I had one last sequence to complete. I logged into the governance module, the one I had built, the one I had tested. I navigated to the user state controls. I found my own profile. A. Ward, Head of Risk Architecture, status active. I initiated the change myself. I brought up a simple prompt. Reason for role change. I typed involuntary removal. No transition package filed. A second box appeared. Invoke Protocol 9F. The system was asking me, the architect, to confirm my own execution. It was forcing me to acknowledge my own removal without approved transition. I clicked yes. A final confirmation box appeared. This action is non-reversible by this user and will engage Tier 1 liquidity safe mode pending board-level intervention. Proceed. I clicked Proceed on my screen. A small amber icon appeared in the corner of the module. It was not a clock. It was a status flag. Section 9F was now in pending activation. The trap was set. All it needed was for them to walk through the door. I walked out of the Helios building at 4:30 in the afternoon. My employee badge was already deactivated. I dropped it into the plastic bin by the security desk. It made a hollow sound. The cab ride from the loop was quiet. The city sliding by in a blur of gray steel and cold November light. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt clear. The daily, exhausting friction of fighting a fool was gone. I was just an architect, and the building was now performing exactly as it was designed to in a fire. At home, I made tea. Earl Grey. Strong. I sat at my personal workstation, a high-specification machine I had built myself, insulated from any corporate software or monitoring. It was clean. I opened a browser. I did not go to the standard employee portal. I navigated to a specific, non-public IP address, one that was not hyperlinked on any internal intranet page. The interface that loaded was stark, black and white, with a single command prompt. This was the secure external portal I had designed 3 years ago, arguing for its existence under the guise of disaster recovery scenarios only. I had told the board it was in case of a fire or a flood that took out the main Chicago server. That was only half true. I built it in case the fire was already inside the building. First, a test. I typed in my old employee credentials, Autumn, Ward, and my complex network password. I hit enter. The system returned an immediate, cold response in red text. Authentication failed. User ID disabled. So, they were efficient. HR had already processed the termination. Good. Now, the real key. I clicked a small, barely visible link at the bottom of the screen labeled Governance Anchor. A different login screen appeared. This one did not ask for a username. It asked for a key file and a 64-character passphrase. I inserted a nondescript USB drive into a port. The key file was on it, encrypted and hidden inside a folder of classical music files. I entered the passphrase. It was not my birthday or my mother's name. It was the full, legal, unabbreviated name of the Scottsdale Governance Protocol, including all subsections. The system authenticated me. I was in. The screen that loaded was not the colorful, branded Helios dashboard. It was the system's core. My architecture panel. It was all text, scrolling logs, and status flags. At the very top, a single line of text glowed in amber liquidity governance status transition package not filed. 9F timer. Active. I had built that timer. It was not a clock counting down the days. It was an event tracker. It was dormant, waiting. It was waiting for a specific set of actions, any attempt to move Tier 1 capital, any attempt to certify a covenant report, any attempt to draw on a credit line, any attempt to finalize the refinancing paperwork. The moment one of those events was initiated by the CFO, the timer would log the action and the trap would spring. My action in the office flagging my own removal without approved transition had armed the system. Now, I had to activate it. I navigated to the Contingency Protocols menu. I selected Protocol 9F Manual Override. A checkbox appeared. Enable Safe Mode Tier 1. I clicked it. This was the move. This was the digital equivalent of turning the master key in the bank vault and hearing the tumblers fall. The system now understood that the condition a missing risk architect was met, and the failsafe was fully, irreversibly engaged. From this exact second, any action that materially affected the firm's liquidity was frozen. Large transfers, covenant certifications, the very refinancing actions Adrian was so desperate to window dress, all of it stopped. The system's new, unchangeable rule was simple. Every one of those actions now required joint sign-off. 2 keys, one was held by Adrian Calloway, the CFO, the other was held by me, the fallback risk guardian. As I watched, the system log populated with a new entry, timestamp 4:52 p.m., and 10 seconds, action 9F, safe mode enabled, authority fallback guardian, reason per previously approved governance policy, 9F, and then the most beautiful part. The system, as I had programmed it 2 years ago in that Scottsdale hotel room, automatically generated a notification. It was not just an internal email, it was 2. One went to an internal address, board, governance, Helios Cap, com. This was an inbox the board rarely checked, but which legally existed for discovery and compliance. It was a log. The second one was different. That one went to external audit log hour audit vendor, com. It was a quiet, automated, data-only email, designed to look like a routine system update. But I knew the senior partner at that firm. He had programmed his own filters. An alert from that specific address, containing the words governance and safe mode, would land on his high-priority dashboard within 10 minutes. It bypassed Adrian. It bypassed the internal legal team. It went straight from my system to the external watchdogs paid to find fraud. Now, the cleanup. I was the fallback guardian. I needed to erase Autumn Ward. I spent the next hour performing a meticulous digital housekeeping. It was a systematic scrubbing of my visible footprints. I went into the ancillary tools I personally owned, the small analysis scripts, the custom reporting dashboards, and I deactivated them. I did not delete them. I simply turned them off. I reassigned non-critical approvals, my signature on expense reports, vacation requests for my old and now presumably scattered team. I reassigned all of them to various department heads. This was crucial. It would make my departure look routine. It would make the chaos that was about to start look like a glitch, not a deliberate, targeted action. Finally, I closed my internal chat accounts. I set my out-of-office reply to the generic HR message. As of today, Autumn Ward is no longer with Helios Meridian Capital. For inquiries, please contact your department head. I had become a ghost. Inside the firm, as far as any user could see, I no longer existed. There was no user profile for Autumn Ward, no admin account, no active email. I was gone. But buried deep in the core protocol, in the unchangeable foundation of the system, a single line of code remained fallback guardian active. The chessboard was set. Now, I just had to watch the other player. I opened a new browser window. I pulled up my financial news feeds. The market was moving. The scenario I had modeled was no longer a hypothetical. Rates were ticking up, 0.5% just since yesterday. Lenders were tightening spreads, getting nervous about a liquidity crunch. I opened my secure archive. I pulled up the Day Zero memo, the one I sent to Adrian, the one he dismissed. Stress scenario, 50 basis point rate, shock plus liquidity repricing, 19-day horizon. It was happening. The pressure I had predicted was building. I set a private counter on my own calendar. He had 19 days from when I sent that memo. That was my calculation for when the buffers would evaporate. That was the window. Day 19. The day their refinancing window closed. The day their covenant reporting must reconcile, or the same banks now tightening their spreads would start asking very specific, very uncomfortable questions. I looked at the dark screen of my architecture panel. The amber light was steady. The trap was silent. I closed my laptop. Just before the screen went black, I whispered it to the empty room. It was not for revenge. It was not in anger. It was a ritual, a simple statement of fact. You were warned. From the laptop's speaker, a soft, programmed chime. The system pinged softly, a sound I had coded myself. The confirmation, on the screen. The final text, before it slept, 9F monitoring active. I, of course, was not there to see it. I was at home, reading a biography of Robert Moses and drinking my tea. But my system was there. My system was my proxy. And it kept meticulous records. Everything I'm about to tell you, I pieced together later from the system logs, the escalation emails that were eventually entered into evidence, and the frantic chat messages that the junior analyst, Diego, had the good sense to archive. The chaos, as I had designed it, began small. It started at 9:04 a.m. the next morning, day 2 of my absence. The first sign looked, to the untrained eye, like a simple, annoying glitch. A senior associate in the Treasury Department, a man named Ben, tried to execute a routine vendor payment, except it wasn't entirely routine. It was a margin call on a complex derivatives position. It was a 7-figure wire transfer that had to be settled by 10 a.m., or the counterparty would start seizing our collateral. Ben hit execute. His screen froze for a moment, then returned a new kind of error message, one he had never seen before. It read, Tier 1 liquidity action, blocked. Joint sign-off required. Fallback guardian, missing. Ben sighed, annoyed. He screenshotted the error and opened a Priority 1 ticket with the IT help desk. System glitch, he wrote. Payment blocked. Says guardian missing. Please fix ASAP. This is time sensitive. The ticket went to a mid-level IT tech who had been with the firm for 6 months. The tech, as I saw from the logs, poked around in the payment module. He saw the new flag. He correctly identified it as legacy logic. He wrote back to Ben, copying his IT manager. Looks like some weird legacy logic from the old risk framework. Probably an old user ID that wasn't scrubbed from the system when Autumn Ward left. I'll try to disable the flag. The tech went into the admin panel. He tried to override the 9F flag. He tried to set its status from active to disabled. The system denied the change. A new log entry was created. Timestamp 9:31 a.m. Action. Unauthorized. Attempt to alter governance protocol. 9F. User IT admin tech. Status denied. And, just as I had programmed it in Scottsdale, the system automatically bundled that log entry and emailed it directly to the audit vendor. The subject line was bland. System governance log update. The IT tech, now confused, messaged Ben back. This is weird. The system won't let me disable the flag. It's locked. You'll have to escalate to Adrian Calloway. It's a finance side control. Ben from Treasury immediately started a group chat with Adrian and Mark, the treasurer. He pasted the error message. Adrian, I have a time-sensitive margin call stuck. It says they can't fix it. The system is asking for a fallback guardian. Can you approve or tell us who that is? Adrian's reply, which came a full 30 minutes later, was a masterclass in dismissive arrogance. I can see it in the chat logs, a digital monument to his hubris. I've seen this, he wrote. It's a naming convention issue from the old team. We're cleaning it up. We'll fix the naming later. Don't worry about it, Ben wrote back. But the payment is blocked. I can't execute. Adrian's next message, sent to the entire Treasury and Finance leadership team, was in all capital letters. Do not slow down execution. Find a workaround. If you can't push it through the main system, use a different rail. Just move the positions. We can backfill the approvals after quarter close. Backfill the approvals. The cardinal sin, he was telling them, in writing. To bypass the controls and falsify the records later. I couldn't have asked for a better piece of evidence. Meanwhile, across the office, a 23-year-old junior risk analyst named Diego, one of the few good ones left, saw the IT ticket. He was curious. He hadn't been fired. Yet, he didn't know what a fallback guardian was, but he knew where to look. He had a higher level of read access than most. He started digging into the governance logs, not the user-facing ones, but the deep system architecture notes. At 11:14 a.m., he found it. He found the digital copy of the Scottsdale policy document. He found Section 9F. His eyes went wide. He read the language. He read the part about involuntary removal. He read the part about unanimous board approval. And then he saw the line, Authority Anchor Fallback Guardian, A. Ward, Reassignment, requires governance procedure 9F. He took a screenshot. Like any good, terrified junior analyst, he posted it in a private, encrypted team channel. Guys, does this mean what I think it means? This glitch? Is it her? The system still thinks she's in charge. His manager, a weak-willed vice president terrified of Adrian's consultants, saw the post 2 minutes later. The manager deleted the screenshot instantly. Then he sent a direct message to Diego. Diego, please don't share this more widely. This is a sensitive technical issue. It is being handled at the top. We don't need to spread rumors, Diego replied. Yes, sir. Understood. Then, as the logs show, Diego quietly exported the entire Section 9F protocol text, the chat log with his manager, and the original screenshot to an encrypted file on his personal cloud drive. He was a smart kid. He was building his own lifeboat. The real trouble started just after lunch. At 1:40 p.m., an email landed in the inbox of Helios's general counsel. It was not from me. It was from the senior partner at our external audit vendor. The partner I knew. The email was painfully polite. Hi, Cynthia, it began. My team has received a few automated alerts that reference unusual patterns in your liquidity governance engine. just a routine check-in. Can we confirm that all signatories as reflected in your most recent policy documents are still active and authorized? We're specifically interested in a flag we've never seen before, a fallback guardian. Just want to make sure our records are aligned before we sign off on the pre-refinancing comfort letter. This, I learned later, sent the legal department into a full-blown panic. The general counsel, Cynthia, printed the email and ran to Adrian's office. She and Mark, the treasurer, had a closed-door meeting with him. Adrian, true to form, tried to brush it off. It's just an overstated control. Cynthia, it's legacy tech. It's that overzealous automation Autumn built. She didn't understand modern agility. Agility. Adrian, Cynthia's voice was apparently shaking. The auditors are flagging it. They're asking about signatories. We have to brief the board. Absolutely not, Adrian snapped. We do not go to the board every time a system gets a little dramatic. It makes us look like we can't manage our own shop. Tell them tech is toning it down. I'll have my consultants put a patch on it by end of day. It's handled. Do not escalate this. It will kill my modernization plan. He had no idea. He couldn't tone it down. He couldn't patch it. My system was not a suggestion. It was a fortress. As the day wore on, the markets continued to twitch. The rate spike I had predicted was gathering steam. And now, the glitches started to stack up, one on top of the other, like a game of Jenga in an earthquake. At 2:30 p.m., an attempt to renew a short-term credit facility was blocked. Joint authorization required. Fallback guardian not present. At 3:15 p.m., a collateral reallocation, necessary to cover the margin call they still hadn't met, was blocked. Joint authorization required. Fallback guardian not present. At 4:01 p.m., the initial paperwork for a small, symbolic bond issue that Adrian had promised to the street was blocked. Joint authorization required. Fallback guardian not present. The Treasury Department was now in open revolt. A digital mutiny. They were flooding Adrian's inbox. He responded by trying to brute force the system, and this is where Diego comes back in. It was 11:47 p.m. Diego was still at his desk, running queries, morbidly fascinated by the train wreck. He was watching the system logs in real time. He saw Adrian's credentials. A. Callaway appear. He saw Adrian, or one of his consultants using his login, trying to force a change. They were trying to manually edit the source code of the payment module. They were trying to change the signatory authority from A. Ward to A. Callaway. The system, of course, denied the change. But it also did something else. It logged the attempt timestamp 11:47 p.m. and 12 seconds. Action critical. Unauthorized attempt to brute force alter governance protocol 9F. User A. Callaway. Status denied. Then, Diego watched in amazement as the system automatically bundled that log entry, a log that was, for all intents and purposes, a confession of attempted wire fraud, and sent a copy. It didn't just send it to the board, it sent it to an address Diego had never seen before. External audit logr audit vendor, com. Diego stared at the screen. He realized this wasn't a bug. This wasn't legacy logic. This was a built-in whistle. This was a trap. And the CFO had just spent the entire day walking right into it, leaving his fingerprints on every single bar of the cage. I was not in that room. Of course, I was in my living room, doing a 750-piece jigsaw puzzle of a Monet painting. But the digital records, the calendar invites, the chat logs, and the sworn statements made later by the general counsel paint a picture so clear, I feel as if I was standing in the corner. The fuse I had lit reached the dynamite on day 17. 2 days before my 19-day forecast was set to expire. It began at 8:55 a.m. An email arrived in the inbox of Karen Rosenfeld, our CEO. It was from Midland First Bank, our main lender, the anchor of the entire refinancing deal. It was a formal note, in the world of high-stakes finance. Formal note is a euphemism for a death threat. The lender's credit committee, the note explained, was formally pausing its approval on the entire refinancing line. The reason was a single, devastating word. They were requesting comfort. They needed comfort. They wrote that Helios Meridian Capital's liquidity controls and covenant monitoring systems were fully operational and stable. And then, the kill shot. The line that I knew had caused Karen Rosenfeld to spill her coffee. This request is informed by several anomalies observed in your control environment, as flagged directly to us by your external audit vendor. Flagged directly. Adrian, in his magnificent arrogance, thought he was fighting an internal glitch. He thought he was arguing with his own IT department. He had no concept, no possible framework in his optics-heavy brain for the idea that the system itself was an independent agent. He had no idea that every single time he and his consultants tried to brute force a change, every time they were denied. The system had been dutifully logging the attempt, bundling it with his user ID, and emailing it straight to the auditors. He thought he was trying to pick a lock. He didn't realize the lock was taking his picture and emailing it to the police. Karen's calendar shows a mandatory summons at 9:15 a.m., her office, invitees Adrian Calloway and Cynthia Hale, our general counsel. Cynthia, I know from the logs, was in a full-blown, career-ending panic. She was the one who had received the auditor's first polite inquiry, the one Adrian had told her to ignore, to tone down. Now, the lender was referencing the auditor's report. The loop of liability was closed, and she was on the wrong side of it. She was the one who brought the logs, the late-night queries from Diego, the screenshots of the failed override attempts, all bearing Adrian's A. Calloway user ID. She laid it out for the CEO. This was not a glitch. This was a governance crisis. We are, in plain language, Karen. I can hear her voice shaking. On the edge of appearing to tamper with our own breaks, the auditors think we're committing fraud. The bank knows the auditors think we're committing fraud. The refinancing is dead. We are not getting the money. This is when Adrian, predictably, tried to throw me under the bus for the last time. This is absurd, he must have blustered. This is not tampering. This is a repair. It's overzealous automation. It's a ridiculous legacy trap left by a former employee who didn't understand modern agility. She's the one who did this. He was right about one thing. I was the one who did this. Karen Rosenfeld is a survivor. She did not get to be CEO by listening to charismatic men who blamed other people. She hates being surprised. And this was the mother of all surprises. Her expression, Cynthia later reported, hardened into something cold and furious. Show me, Karen said. So Cynthia Hale, our general counsel, who had finally done the homework she should have done 2 years ago in Scottsdale, put the governance protocol on the 60-inch monitor in Karen's office. They scrolled past the preamble. They scrolled to the paragraph I wrote while they were complaining about the Wi-Fi. The words, once so boring they were invisible, now glowed like neon. If key risk leadership is removed without a formal, board-approved transition package and covenant handoff, Karen's head swiveled to Adrian. You told me her transition was streamlined. You told me HR had this. Adrian's face, I imagine, was the color of drywall. It was a redundancy. Karen, a simplification. Cynthia kept reading. All Tier 1 liquidity actions auto-lock behind a mandatory dual-signer chain, the Chief Financial Officer and the designated Fallback Risk Guardian. Who is the Fallback Risk Guardian? Karen asked. Cynthia scrolled. Reassignment of the Fallback Risk Guardian role requires a unanimous vote of the Board of Directors, and the current Guardian's written notarized consent. Silence. Just the hum of the servers. Karen's voice was now dangerously quiet. Adrian, did you read this document? Did you read this when you signed the policy updates in Scottsdale? He insisted he couldn't remember. He said it was buried in policy minutiae. Cynthia, in her moment of pure, terrified self-preservation, was ready. She clicked to the next slide. It was the scanned PDF of the signature page from the Scottsdale offsite. the board chair's looping signature. The former CFO's scrawl, and right there, on the line for attending finance executives, were the sharp, angular initials. He had initialed the stack. He had been there. He had approved it, all while dreaming of the 18th hole. As if on cue, Karen's video conferencing unit chimed. A call was coming in from Elliot Dean, the head of the board's governance committee, the man Cynthia had clearly, frantically, called just an hour before. His face appeared on the screen, grim and tired. "Karen, Cynthia, Mr. Calloway," he said. He wasn't smiling. "I've just been reading the protocol, and I've just read the email chain from our audit partner. I have one very simple question for the group. Why does the Helios governance system still list Autumn Ward as the active authority for this role? If she's been terminated..." This was the part Adrian couldn't grasp, the part that was, to him, impossible. "She doesn't work here," he apparently yelled. "HR processed her termination." Cynthia Hale, the lawyer, finally delivered the killing blow. She looked at Elliot on the screen, but she was speaking to Adrian. "Because, Elliot, the role isn't tied to her employment status. Legal has confirmed this. Autumn designed the role to be separate from an employee ID, a payroll account, or a network login. It's an architectural designation. It's tied to the protocol itself." She took a deep breath. When Adrian terminated her employment without executing the Section 9F transition protocol, he didn't remove her from the system. He did the opposite. By failing to follow the policy he himself initialed, he legally affirmed her as the only recognized authority anchor. The system sees her as the guardian. It sees his attempts to get in as a hostile attack. Adrian just stood there, whispering, She can't. She doesn't even work here." Cynthia just looked at him. "That, Adrian, is the entire point. She built the alarm to work, even if the arsonist owns the building." The logs show the video call was silent for a full 17 seconds. Then, Karen Rosenfeld, the CEO, leaned forward, placing her hands flat on her desk. She exhaled, a long, slow hiss of air. It was the sound of a billion-dollar deal, and her own reputation evaporating. She said the line that would change everything, the line that sealed Adrian's fate and began my resurrection. "So," she said, her voice flat, all the anger gone, replaced by a cold, tactical reality. "To get our refinancing approved, to get Midland First Bank to release the funds, we have to go back to the person we just paid to leave, the person Adrian just called legacy complexity, and ask her to save us." The silence that followed, I'm told, was deafening. The email arrived at 6:14 in the morning on day 18. My 19th day clock was still ticking, but this was an accelerant. The ping from my phone was soft, but it landed in the quiet pre-dawn stillness like a gunshot. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the gray light creep over the city. I had slept perfectly. I picked up the phone. The sender was Karen Rosenfeld. The subject line was a desperate prayer wrapped in corporate speak, urgent 9F signatory discussion. Your assistance requested. My assistance, not my reinstatement, not my job, my assistance. The email itself was a masterpiece of studied panic. It was painfully polite. The word mistake was nowhere to be found. The word termination was also absent. Instead, it spoke of the recent changes to your role and a system interpretation issue. It laid out the entire crisis, the one my system logs had already shown me. The lender, Midland First Bank, had formally paused the refinancing. The audit vendor had raised concerns. The control paths were currently non-responsive. The deadline was imminent. They were, in the most respectful terms possible, completely and totally paralyzed. The email ended with a single, desperate plea. We respectfully request your cooperation in releasing certain time-sensitive liquidity locks and clarifying the intent of Section 9F for our external partners. Clarifying the intent. They wanted me to tell the auditors that the loaded gun I had built was, in fact, just a novelty lighter. They wanted me to call it a mistake. I put the phone down. I did not reply. I made myself breakfast. 2 eggs, scrambled, dry toast. I drank a second cup of coffee. I watched the market open at 8:30. I saw the spreads on mid-size investment-grade debt widen by another 10 basis points. I knew, somewhere on the 32nd floor of the Helios building, that news had just made a dozen people physically ill. The cost of their refinancing, if it even happened, was going up by the minute. I let them wait. I let the pressure build in that glass box. I let Adrian sit there, knowing the auditors were pinging his boss, who was pinging the CEO, who was now staring at her inbox, waiting for a ghost to reply. At 1:15 in the afternoon, I sent a reply. It was 3 sentences long. Karen, thank you for reaching out. I am available to meet at 3 p.m. today at the O'Hare Hilton lobby bar, if that is convenient. It seemed like a practical, neutral location, since you are all so busy. The reply from her executive assistant came back in less than 60 seconds. 3 p.m. is confirmed. They will be there. I arrived at 2:45. I got a table in a dark corner, a booth with a clear view of the entrance, and I ordered a sparkling water with a lime. I was calm. I was not there to negotiate my job back. I was there to conduct a post-mortem on theirs. They arrived at 3:02. They were late, which I expected. They were flustered, which I had counted on. Karen came first, her CEO mask of calm firmly in place, but her eyes were exhausted. She looked like she hadn't slept, because she hadn't. Beside her was Elliot Dean, the head of the board's governance committee, a man in his late 60s who looked like he had just seen his retirement account vaporize. And shuffling behind them, his charisma completely extinguished, was Adrian Calloway. There was no consulting entourage. There were no iPads. He was not a magician. He was a defendant. His expensive suit looked slept in. His tie was loose. He was visibly diminished. Smaller than I had ever seen him. He wouldn't make eye contact. They slid into the booth opposite me. The air was thick with their panic and my composure. "Autumn," Karen began, her voice strained but professional. "Thank you for meeting us." "Karen, Elliot," I said, nodding to both of them. I did not acknowledge Adrian. He, however, tried to speak. It was a reflex, the desperate act of a man who was used to controlling every room he was in. "Autumn, look," he started, his voice gravelly. "I want to just say that there was a—" I held up one hand, not aggressively, just a simple, firm gesture, a full stop. "My business is not with you, Adrian," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the hushed bar. I turned my full attention, my entire body, toward Karen and Elliot. In that moment, Adrian Calloway ceased to exist. He was a side note. He was the problem on the table, not a participant in the solution. He shrank back into the booth, his face flushing a dark, blotchy red. "They're asking you what it would take," Karen said, getting straight to it. "The lenders, the auditors, what would it take to cleanly transition the fallback guardian role so we can proceed?" They still thought this was about a transition. They still thought they could just find a new key holder. "You don't need a transition, Karen," I said evenly. "A transition implies the system is sound. The system is not sound. This event proves it." I leaned forward. "You're asking me what it will take to unlock the funds, but what you need is an architecture that won't let this happen again. The lenders don't need a new name in a box. They need a new box." Elliot Dean, the board member, was watching me. He was the only one who looked like he was actually thinking, not just panicking. "What does that mean, Ms. Ward?" "A new architecture. It means you have a fundamental governance failure," I said. "You have a management structure that sees risk controls as friction and legacy complexity. You have a CFO who, when warned of a fire, tried to cut the alarm wires because the ringing annoyed him. You don't need me to clarify the intent of Section 9F. You need to make it permanent. You need to make it real." I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. It was not a resume. It was not a plea. It was a term sheet. I slid it across the table. Karen unfolded it. Elliot leaned in to read it. "There are 3 terms," I said, narrating my demands. "If you want the system unlocked, if you want the auditors and the lenders to get their comfort, this is the new architecture. 1. I will not be an employee. I will be contracted as the Independent Liquidity Governance Officer. I will be contracted directly by the board's governance committee, not by management. My reports go to you. Elliot, my invoices go to you. Management will have no authority over my role, my compensation, or my tenure." I let that sink in. I had just drawn a line between me and everyone in management. 2. My authority as fallback guardian, as defined in Section 9F, remains in full force. It cannot be revoked, reassigned, or altered without 2 things: a unanimous board approval and my own written, notarized consent. If I don't agree to be replaced, I cannot be replaced. Karen's eyes widened. She understood the implication. I was making myself a permanent, structural part of the firm's governance, with a veto over my own removal. "And 3, I said, delivering the final, necessary blow. "Any and all future changes to liquidity controls, any changes to covenant monitoring logic, or any attempt to alter Section 9F itself must carry my digital signature to be considered valid by the system, not my consultation, not my review, my authorization." Karen and Elliot exchanged a long look. It was the look of 2 people who had absolutely no choice. The terms were brutal, they were absolute, and they were also the only logical, defensible solution. They were, in fact, exactly what the auditors would want to see: a truly independent, empowered, and insulated control. Elliot Dean let out a long, slow breath. He looked at the paper, then at me. He muttered it, just loud enough for me to hear, a quiet confession of their own incompetence. "We should have built this," he said. "We should have built this before we fired you." From the corner of the booth, Adrian finally spoke. His voice was bitter, dripping with the acid of his own irrelevance. "So that's it. You just get to veto everything I do now. You get to be the king." I turned to him slowly. I looked at him, really looked at him, the numbers magician who thought rules were for other people. "No, Adrian," I said, my voice flat and cold. "You misunderstand the architecture. You still get to propose things. You get to have your ideas. You get to make your pretty slides." I paused and gave him the final, chilling truth. "You get to propose. The system and I will decide if they're survivable." That night, the Helios Meridian Capital Board of Directors held an emergency virtual meeting at 8 p.m. I was not invited, but Elliot Dean called me at 10:30 p.m., his voice sounding older than it had in the bar, to give me the summary. They had reviewed my 1-page term sheet. They had placed it side by side with the formal, final ultimatum from Midland First Bank, which had been delivered an hour after our meeting. The bank's demand was simple: provide evidence of stable, independent, and verifiable liquidity governance by close of business on day 19 the following day, or the entire refinancing line would be permanently pulled and all outstanding credit lines would be called for review. It was my terms, or bankruptcy. According to Elliot, there was a brief, furious argument. A few of the older board members, allies of the previous CEO, were incensed. One of them, a man who ran a manufacturing empire, apparently shouted about rewarding an employee who architected this lever and holding the firm hostage. This, Elliot told me, is when Cynthia Hale, the general counsel, finally and completely saved her own career by sacrificing Adrian's. She pointed out, in cold, legal precision, that I had not architected a lever in secret. I had authored a policy that the board, had discussed, voted on, and unanimously approved 2 years prior, a policy that management, in the form of Adrian Calloway, had subsequently initialed and then ignored. In writing, in a way that was now documented by their external auditors as a gross breach of governance. "She is not holding us hostage," Cynthia apparently stated, her voice finally steady. "Mr. Calloway's actions are, the policy she wrote is the only thing that stopped him from driving the firm off a cliff. The policy worked. Not reading it is on us, not on her." The debate, Elliot said, ended instantly. The question was no longer about rewarding me. It was about adopting the only viable control framework they had. The vote was called at 10:17 p.m. It was unanimous. The board voted to contract me under the precise structure I had proposed. They voted to formally recognize me as the independent liquidity governance officer, reporting only to the board. And they voted to affirm my role as the fallback guardian in perpetuity, a role that could only be reassigned with my explicit, written consent. The next morning, day 19, was a beautiful, cold, clear Chicago day. The countdown had 1 day left. At 9 a.m., a legal courier arrived at my apartment. He was not from Helios. He was from the board's external law firm. He handed me a thick contract. I read it over twice. My terms were all there, translated into dense, ironclad legalese. Before I signed, I made one small addition. I took a black pen and, in a blank space on the addendum page, I wrote one final clause. I stipulated that any future attempt by any internal party to bypass my authority, either through side agreements, unlogged system changes, or any form of software tampering would automatically, and without any further action required, trigger a non-reversible, high-priority notification to both the primary lender's credit committee and the senior partner at the audit firm. I was not just locking the door, I was wiring it to an alarm that went straight to the bank. I initialed the change, I signed the contract, the courier countersigned as a witness, placed it in a secure briefcase, and left. At 10:04 a.m., my laptop chimed, an email from Elliot Dean. "Signed contract received and countersigned by the board. Your authorization credentials have been formalized. Please proceed as discussed." I sat at my desk. I opened the secure portal, the governance anchor login. I typed in my 64-character passphrase and connected my key file. This time, I was not a ghost. I was not a failsafe. I was the law. The system recognized the change. The stark black and white text interface dissolved, replaced by the full administrative dashboard. At the top of the screen, a new greeting glowed in a calm, stable green. It read, "Fallback Guardian fully authorized. Tier 1 controls active." I was in, and I saw the queue. For 18 days, every major financial action had been stacking up, blocked by my digital ghost. It was a logjam of catastrophic proportions. I saw dozens of pending actions, all initiated by A. Calloway. I began my work. It was a technical climax, but a quiet one. It was just me, a cup of coffee, and a series of binary decisions. I was a surgeon, separating the vital from the malignant. I reviewed the queue of blocked actions. Some were routine, vendor payments, payroll transfers. These, I approved, action approve, authority fallback guardian. A. Ward, but then I saw the others. The ones Adrian had been desperately trying to force through, the dangerously sloppy attempts to pretty up the balance sheet, the very reclassifications he had proposed in that meeting, the creative accounting to window dress the liquidity ratios. On these, I clicked Deny, Action Deny, Authority, Fallback Guardian, A. Ward, Reason Non-Compliant with Covenant Protocol 7.2. I was, in real time, unwinding his entire frantic attempt to build a house of cards. I was selectively approving only those actions that kept the firm solvent and fully painfully covenant compliant. At 11:30 a.m., the queue was clear, the system was clean. It was, for the first time in Adrian's tenure, forced to be honest, now, for the final move. I navigated to the reporting module. I initiated a new liquidity attestation package. The system, now running on clean data I had just approved, whirred for a moment. It gathered all the now honest liquidity ratios, all the covenant checks, all the payment logs. It bundled them into a clean, audited file, and it attached the new, mandatory digital signature block, approved A. Callaway, CFO, co-authorized A. Ward, Independent Liquidity Governance Officer. For the first time in 18 days, the system pushed a file to Midland First Bank, a clean, fully audited attestation package. It showed the dual signer structure. It showed my name, my new title, and my independent authority. It was a digital statement that the adults were, finally, back in charge. I sent it at 11:31 a.m. I waited. The afternoon was the longest of my life. The deadline was close of business. The lender's response arrived at 3:47 p.m. It was an email from the head of the credit committee, forwarded to me by Elliot Dean. They acknowledged the strengthened governance. They formally accepted the new signatory structure. And they approved the refinancing. The memo, which I read 3 times, contained one sentence that was sweeter than any revenge. "We note," the lender wrote, "that Helios's revised oversight structure materially reduces the key person and governance risk previously identified." Key person risk. That's what he had called me. He was right. I was a risk. To him, the crisis was over. The money was safe. In the background of that email chain, a quieter decision was already in motion. Elliot, perhaps by mistake, had forwarded me the full chain. At the very bottom was a new calendar invite, sent from the head of the board's HR committee. It was for an executive session, scheduled for the following week. The subject line was innocuous: leadership continuity discussion. The attendee list was small: the entire board, the general counsel, and Karen Rosenfeld. The one name conspicuously absent from the calendar invite was Adrian Callaway. The implication was not subtle. It was a corporate execution, scheduled for a week from Tuesday. Adrian sat alone. I know this because the meeting invites were over, and the final signature was still pending at 7 p.m. on day 19. He was in that glass conference room, the one they used for executions, staring at the final liquidity governance protocol document. Cynthia, from legal, had emailed it to him an hour before. His digital signature was the last key. The refinancing, the billions of dollars, the entire future of the firm was contingent on him clicking approve. I had drafted most of the new clauses myself, with the board's external law firm polishing the language. Page 1, I'm told, looked familiar. Standard corporate boilerplate about controls, attestations, and responsibilities. The boilerplate he had never bothered to read, but he read it this time. He flipped to page 3. He saw my work. He saw the new clause, Tier 1 liquidity authority will be exercised jointly by the Chief Financial Officer and the Independent Liquidity Governance Officer fallback guardian. He saw the next part. This authority is non-revocable without unanimous board consent and the written, notarized release by both parties. Not just the board, both of us. I had a permanent seat at the table, and I also had a key to my own chair. Lower down, in a small, vague gray font. He almost missed I had suggested that formatting was the real engine. All future changes to liquidity controls, covenant logic, or Section 9F itself, require joint authorization. Not consult, not inform, authorize. Then, he must have scrolled to the signature block, the part that made it all real. 2 lines. Primary signatory Adrian Callaway, Chief Financial Officer. Tier 1 co-signatory, non-revocable without unanimous board consent Autumn Ward, Independent Liquidity Governance Officer. He must have hesitated. I watched the signature awaiting ping on my own screen. It sat there. For 1 minute, 2, 5. He was realizing it. This signature didn't just fix the current crisis. This document braided his power, his authority, his very ability to do his job, permanently and irrevocably with mine, with the person he had tried to erase, every bonus-driven earnings optics move, every agile shortcut, every window-dressing trick he ever wanted to pull, would now have to pass through the very person he had dismissed as friction. He was trapped. Outside that room, the board was waiting. Karen had already co-signed the board resolution an hour ago. I had seen her signature come through. The lender, Midland First, was waiting. Their system was set to receive the final executed documents by close of business, or the deal was dead. There was no alternative path. There was no one else to call. There was no magic trick left. It was this signature, or it was public, catastrophic failure. His failure, at 7:14 p.m., the alert came through. Adrian signed, on my home workstation. The system pinged softly. A new status appeared on my dashboard. 9F status, active and stable. Dual authority confirmed. I opened another window and looked at the external audit portal. The dashboard, which had been a sea of red and amber flags for 2 weeks, refreshed to a calm, boring, beautiful bright green. The crisis, on paper, was over. I sat there, watching the green lights. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. It was not a victory. It was a correction. I simply noted, as a matter of architectural fact, that from this moment forward, no chief financial officer at Helios Meridian Capital would ever move money fast without moving through me first. But there was one final beat. I know this, because the system logs every action, and I saw his user ID access the document's footer after he signed it. Back in that glass room, a newly shackled CFO must have scrolled to the very bottom of the document, to the fine print he had, once again, failed to read before signing. He noticed one last line, the one I had added myself, the one the lawyers loved. This protocol supersedes all prior internal delegations, verbal or written. Any attempt to alter or bypass Tier 1 authority without joint consent will be treated as a material governance breach and will be reported to external stakeholders automatically. He must have leaned back in his chair, the cold glass reflecting his face. He was finally understanding. He was never really in control of the system. He was only ever in control of the parts I allowed him to touch. The numbers magician, the charismatic man who ignored my warning, had just used his last clean, independent signature to make my authority permanent. I closed my laptop. The story ends there. His reflection, caught in the dark, mirrored glass of a computer screen that no longer answered to him. Thank you for listening to this story. I am fascinated to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening, and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.